Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues and guests. Today we have the 18th of May 2021, 3 o'clock Moscow time. Let us consider the Dissertation Council for the Defense of the Dissertation of Mordvinova Arina Eduardovna for the degree of Candidate of Economic Sciences in the Scientific Speciality 08-0014 World Economics on the topic State Policy of Old Industrial Areas Revitalization in the Practice of Foreign Countries Considered Open. Order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University, Ignatov Alexander Valentinovich, from the 10th of March 2021, number 1705/1, I, Yefimova Yelena Glebovna, PhD of Economic Sciences, Associate Professor of the Department of World Economy at St. Petersburg State University, was appointed Chairman of the Dissertation Council, and this order also approved the members of the Dissertation Council. Navrodska Natalia Anatolievna, Doctor of Economics, Associate Professor of the World Economy Department at St. Petersburg University. Yelena Mikhailovna Krastashevskaya, Doctor of Economics, Professor of the Faculty of Economic Theory and Economic Policies in Petersburg State University. In the remote access mode, the following people are present: Radomsky Leonid Borisovich, Doctor of Economics, Professor, Head of the Center for Post-Soviet Studies, Chief Researcher of the Institute of Economics and the Russian Academy of Sciences. Can you see and hear us? Your microphone is off. Yes, I can see and hear you well. Thank you. Tadeusz Strykevich, Doctor of Geography, Professor at the Faculty of Socioeconomic Geography and Spatial Management at the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan, Poland. Can you see and hear us?
Dobry dzień. Słyszycie? Can you hear me? Okay.
Thank you.
PhD candidate Mordvinova Irina Eduardovna is also present with us. Also, the scientific supervisor of the applicant is present, Maltsev Andrei Alexandrovich, Doctor of Economics, Professor, leading researcher at the Center for Regional Comparative Studies of the Institute of Economics of the Ural branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Andrei Alexandrovich is present in remote access mode. Andrei Alexandrovich, can you hear us? Thank you. To improve the quality of communication, I'll ask you, dear colleagues who are in remote access mode, to turn off your microphones, but please do not forget to turn them on when you're given the floor. I also inform you that audio and video recording of our meeting is being carried out and live broadcast on the St. Petersburg State University website. Simultaneous translation is also provided from Russian into English and from English into Russian. During the live broadcast of the Dissertation Council, an email address is posted where during the meeting all listeners can express their opinion and send questions to the applicant online. Questions are to concern the dissertation and the current scientific discussion of the presentation. These questions will be sent by the technical specialist to me, and I'll voice them during the discussion. Questions should be related to the presentation of the applicant and the content of the dissertation. And it is obligatory to indicate your name, position, and place of work. I mean the authors of the questions. Questions are not related to the scientific debate and the thesis, the text of the thesis, and the evaluation of the dissertation. And anonymous questions will not be voiced. In accordance with the procedure for awarding the academic degree of Candidate of Sciences, academic degree of Doctor of Sciences at St. Petersburg State University, approved by local regulations of St. Petersburg State University, hereinafter the procedure. Meeting of the Dissertation Council is considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved composition takes part in its work, but no less than 4 people for members of the Dissertation Council. Our board consists of 5 people and all 5 are present, including 2 members of the Council in remote access mode. All members of the Dissertation Council and the applicant are provided with audio-visual contact. Thus, there is a quorum. I establish the following rules of procedure for today's meeting of the Dissertation Council with a total duration of approximately 2 hours. First, brief information of the chairperson about the applicant and the documents submitted by the applicants for the scientific degree and their compliance with the established requirements. Answer to possible questions. About 5 minutes. 2. Short presentation by the applicant for scientific degree reflecting the main points of the research. Arina, Eduardovna, you will be given the floor for 15 minutes. 3. Questions to the applicant strictly according to the report. No more than 2 minutes per question. 4. Answers of the applicants. No more than 5 minutes for all the questions. 5. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council with the assessment of the dissertation research and the presentation of the applicant with questions and suggestions for the applicant. About 10 minutes per speaker. 6. Speech by the chairperson with the assessment of the dissertation research. About 10 minutes. 7. Answers of the applicants for scientific degree to the questions and comments of the members of the Dissertation Council. No more than 20 minutes. 8. Open discussion. At the request of those present at the defense of the dissertation, with a summary of the position or specific question and suggestion to the candidates strictly on the topic of research, no more than 2 minutes per person. At the same time, we ask all those willing to ask questions, register in the registration form and completely introduce themselves before asking the question. 9. Submission by the chairman of question addressed to the applicant, which came in order to discuss the speech and scientific discussion via the broadcast of the meeting of the Dissertation Council on the website of St. Petersburg State University. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that written question, the announcement of which takes more than 2 minutes, will not be voiced. 10. Applicant's answers. No more than 10 minutes per question. 11. Presentation of the scientific supervisor of the applicant, no more than 3 minutes. 12. Discussion by the members of the Dissertation Council before the open vote of the results of the defense, during which the sound of the broadcast is muted. About 5 minutes. 13. Open roll call. Counting of votes by the chairman of the Dissertation Council with the entry of the result into the minutes of the meeting. 14. Making a decision on whether or not to award or not to award the academic degree. 15. Concluding remarks. Arina Eduardovna will have no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, are there any questions or objections to the procedure? No questions. Since there are no objections, I'll proceed to the implementations of the procedure. First of all, please turn off the sound of your mobile phones. And my dear colleagues of the Dissertation Council who are in remote access mode, I would ask you not to turn off your phones for prompt communication in case of technical failures. Thank you for your understanding. So let's start the meeting. The dissertation of Mordvinova Arina Eduardovna for the degree of candidate of economics, scientific major 080014 World Economics, on the topic State Policy of Old Industrial Areas Revitalization in the Practice of Foreign Countries, was accepted for defense by the order of the Scientific Secretary of St. Petersburg State University, Gniotov Alexander Valentinovich, from the 2nd of February 2021, number 797/1. Arina Eduardovna Mordvinovna wrote the thesis on the basis of the Ural State Economic University. The scientific supervisor is Doctor of Economic Sciences, Professor, leading researcher of the Center for Regional Comparative Studies of the Institute of Economics of the Ural branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Maltsev Andrei Alexandrovich. The number of publications of the applicant, which set out the basic scientific results of the dissertation of the thesis, amount to 14 works in peer-reviewed journals from a list approved by the Ministry of Education of the Russian Federation, 3 publications in publication indexed by Scientific basis of Web of Science and Scopus 2. The applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University a complete package of documents for acceptance, for consideration and defense of the thesis. All documents correspond to Clause 12 of Section 3 of the procedure. All the documents provided by the applicant, according to the information that I have received from the curator, meet the requirements and are kept in the attestation document. The copies are possessed by the Department for the Support of the Dissertation Council, present at the meeting. Dear participants of the Dissertation Council, before giving the floor to the applicant, I would like to ask you if you have any general questions to the applicant. Is there the necessity to consider the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant for defense? The members of the Dissertation Council have no questions. Then we proceed. Arina, Eduardovna, we give the floor to you. You have 15 minutes. Dear Chairman, dear members of the Dissertation Council, let me present you my presentation on the topic State Policy of Revitalization of Old Industrial Regions in Praxis of Foreign Countries. The purpose of the research was based on the definition of old industrial regions and to identify the importance of participation of state in the revitalization of economy of old industrial regions of different tribes, for drawing up the basic algorithm to develop the strategy to evolve OIAs in the modern Portuguese. To solve the problem, there was a criterial and comparative analysis carried out in order to determine the economic recovery of the regions. As a result of the research, the following most important objectives for defense were discussed in the work. The first one, the topology of the OIAs is introduced. I'm sorry, Arina Eduardovna. We will carry the technical break number 1. Leonid Borisovich? Are you with us, Leonid Borisovich? Yes, I'm sorry, I just had to fetch my pen. I'm sorry. The technical break number 1 is over. Arina Eduardovna, will you proceed, please? The first point of defense is about the inheterogeneity of OIAs as an economic category, and the difference in theoretical approach to understanding the essence of different countries clearly manifested in 2010. Before this time, which is exemplified on slide number 4, OIA were treated preferably as a direct legacy of industrial revolution degraded during the second half of the 20th century. And the recent works in this area of the authors primarily from developing countries focus their attention on the later stages of formation and of the internalization of OIAs, emphasize the connection between the industrial recession of the regions at the beginning of the market reform in the countries, or generally vote on a linking of the stages of development of OIA to specific historic periods. These differences resulted from the comparative analysis of the development of 12 countries. It was possible to identify two main groups, and their schematic interpretation can be seen on slide 5. It made up of the region originated in Manchester, rural Lille, as well as later in USA, and some countries of Central and Eastern Europe, for example, Lodz and Debra Silesia in Poland, Moravia and Silesian region in the Czech Republic. They are the subject of many studies of the problem of OIA in mid-2010s. Slide 6 schematically shows the stages of development of the second group of OIA, especially in Asia and as well as in some Latin American countries. In contrast to the regions of the first group, this territory was consolidated as industrial centers only by the second half of the 20th century. But in 2010, they entered the crisis phase, thus repeating the path of the US and European Union of industrial development. This fact explains the emergence of the period of new approaches to the definition of the term old industrial regions. The revealed heterogeneity allowed us to reveal two types of OIA, the classic and catch-up. The features that have in common a high proportion of industrial production in the structure of economy, dependence on the number of core values, high vulnerability to external factor, and single development cycle. And the presence of common features makes it possible to identify these types as different variations of the same economic phenomena. At the same time, it was possible to identify a number of criteria that make it possible to distinguish between classical and catching up OIA. Classical are characterized by the average duration of the period of economic growth of about 100 years, minimal participation of the state in the formation of industrialization, favorable environmental conditions during periods of growth and prosperity, coincidence of periods of their growth and their dominance of the corresponding technological paradigms, and competitive advantages based on technological leadership. Regions of the second type are characterized by the later period of formation, shorter stages of prosperity and industrialization, prevailing role of the state in creating and maintaining competitive advantages, and based on technology of already replaced technological orders, and face a position from other countries during the period of industrialization. The second position for defense. On the basis of the analysis carried out, the concept of catching up old industrial region is introduced as a region formed with the active support of the state on the basis of technologies of substitute technological structures and use mainly cost competitiveness based on the lower cost of the production factor. In contrast to the interpretation of the OOA presented economic scientists, the definition proposed refers exclusively to the regions of catching up type and avoids duplication of the definition and emphasizes the key characteristics. Firstly, the catching up type of OIA are distinguished by the decisive role of the state in the process of industrialization. During the 20,000s, two-thirds of GRP in China, and in 2013 their share was about 50%. The automotive industry of São Paulo was formed in the 50s and 60s with beginning of an active protectionist policy of the country. To compare, the industrialization process of classical OIA took place as a natural process as scientific and technological advances were spreading, and several competing industrial enterprises large enough to introduce mass production technologies and create high entry barriers in the industry also played a real role. Exemplified by Cadillac Motor Co., Ford Motor Co., and General Motors in Detroit. It's worth noting that in some classical OA, the state played an active role in some stages. However, unlike classical OIA, catching up OIA had the dominant manufacturing sector at the time of transition for a planned economy. Secondly, catching up OIA are based on the technology of already replaced technological orders. All Asian OIAs specializing in coal mining, forest metallurgy, and mechanical engineer entered the phase of active growth only in the second half of the 20th century. Latin American OIA specializing in non-ferrous metallurgy began after the replacement of the fourth technological order. Classical OAs are mainly formed during periods of dominance of specialized technological orders. Thirdly, in view of the development of industry based on outdated technologies to promote their own products at the stages of industrialization of growth, catching up OAA use price competitiveness based on cheap factors of production and governmental support. This is indirectly evidenced by, for example, attempts by Western countries to restrict the sale of products from Asian OAAs. In 2000s, the EU accused the Korean shipbuilding companies of dumping and receiving governmental subsidies. In the 2016 EU affected the Chinese and Korean steel and metal product. The third thesis for defense. 5 models of the state policy of utilizing of OAA have been identified. It has been established that their differences are mainly in the degree of involvement and the functions of different levels of government in the process of revitalization of OAAs. The comparative analysis revealed the strengths and weaknesses of the model. The specific trait of the Western European model is to develop an individual approach to the regions of revitalization. At the same time, the model has a number of disadvantages. It's a high dependence as the result of the initiative of regional authorities, financial and time costs for the implementation of individual programs, the persistent severity of social and environmental problems, and in some cases, a loss of production potential. The transformation of Manchester from the former leader of the textile industry into the cultural center of the country through the development of creative industry can serve as an example of fairly successful revitalization. For example, in 2017 alone, 703,000 music tourists visited Manchester. The Central European model, distinguished by the authorities' desire to prioritize the preservation of the industrialization of each OOA. Its strengths are the preservation of industrial potential, development of new industries, assistance of the central authorities to local initiatives, to the support of socially vulnerable segments of the population in the reform process. Among the advantages are the dependencies of the result on the participation of investors and municipalities, low innovation activity, and the persistence of environmental problems. Within the framework of the model, the region of Upper Silesia in Poland has achieved notable success, having managed to convert from coal and ferrous metallurgy to the production of electronics and automobiles. And the employment of miners here decreased by 73%, and automotive cluster was formed, the number of employed in which reached 60,000 people. The American model is focused primarily on protecting the national industry as a whole, without taking into account the needs of individual territories. The protection of producers at the central level, the stimulation of innovation, minimal government spending to support inefficient industry are the main characteristics of it. Among the vulnerabilities of the model are the insecurity of the working class, the lack of large-scale support from the population, the dependence of the result of the interaction of private enterprises and local authorities. This combination of features makes it possible for conflicting examples to exist within the American model. Against the backdrop of Detroit, which in 2013 became the largest municipal bankruptcy of the U.S. history, we can have a look at Pittsburgh, which launched economic growth by assimilating industrial innovation, and this is impressive. The city, for example, in early 2000s achieved the status of an order of executive for NASA, and at the basis of the existing steelmaking capacities, launched the production of special alloys for aerospace industry. The main feature of the Asian model in the subordination of regional strategies to the central guidelines for maintaining the overall competitiveness of the country's economy can be distinguished. This advantage includes the consistency of state policies, the solution to systematic problems of industry, financial support of the population. At the same time, this approach requires significant financial resources, provokes a crisis in certain branches of specialization, preserve the dependence of industry and government support, and exclude the possibility of adapting the strategy to the needs of a specific region. The city's electricity generation, Donbay region, increased, which accounted for 30% of the capacity of all wind farms in the province. However, in recent years, Donbay has been putting special attention to high-tech industry. In 2020, investment in the production of optical fiber, lithium batteries, and processing of rare earth metals increased by 3.4%. In another province, the number of new high-tech companies increased by 47%. The Latin American model is distinguished by the orientation of the authorities toward the preservation of the basic industries, mainly due to the growth of private sector. Positive aspects includes the protection from local producers at the central level, the attraction to foreign investment. The weakness is low social orientation and lack of programs for retaining personnel, creating new jobs, and their dependence on the strategic interests of foreign policy. In the framework of this model, São Paulo managed to compel them General Motors to abandon the closure of the production in the region and to invest in its development 1.3 billion in exchange for concessions on issues of indexation of salaries of employees. Nevertheless, the model is at the stage of formation and the crisis tendency persists. In 2019, current production was only 67% of 2012 and continued to decline. Amid the pandemic, the region unfortunately became the leader in the number of layoffs in Brazil. The fourth position for defense. On the basis of the generalization of foreign practice of the 90 regions of the 12 countries, there is a baseline algorithm developed strategy of revitalization of the economy. The steps can be seen on the slide 11, and the systematized package is involved as a tool. The analysis proved that the problem is constantly is in the scope of view of the state. In all examples considered, the governments made attempts to restore the economies of their states. At the same time, the developing countries, the task of reviving of OIA is only increasing. In this regard, the algorithm is of practical interest. At each state, the delineation of the areas of responsibility of the participants is monitored. With all the variety of possible strategies for revitalizing the OIA, in foreign practice, as a rule, a similar set of economic and managerial decision is used. The analysis made it possible to identify 8 groups of basic tools. They can be seen on slide 12. And the letters correspond to the levels of authority. A different combination of tools might be used. Their joint use might be individually applied for each region, thus uniquely developing the strategy appropriate for the region. Thus, the number of OIA in world practice is significantly greater than previously thought, and at the same time, new cases have their own features. In these conditions, we should not focus solely on European or American experience. There is no universal strategy of revitalization of OIA. However, the key factor in deriving the economic potential is active participation of the central authorities. Even the most interesting initiatives of the regional local authorities or private sector usually doomed to failure. And the greatest positive effect was also achieved with the coordination of actions at all levels of authority. The report is over. Thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Arina Eduardovna, for your report. My question is to the members of the Decision Council. Are there any questions based on the research, considering the presentation given by the applicant? If there are any questions, you have 2 minutes per question, dear members of the Dissertation Council. All members of the Dissertation Council present or in remote access mode. Yes, Yelena Mikhailовna? Arina Eduardovna, please, could you say which experience can be drawn by Russian agents from the international experience of revitalization of OIA? That's the first question. And the second question, what are the further areas of research of these areas? Thank you very much for your question. I would like to answer the first question. As for the experience that we can use in the territory of the Russian Federation, I would like to say that there is a great opportunity of adapting the foreign experience for the Russian Federation, and this might serve as a ground for further research. Definitely we should look at the participation of the state in the process, and collective work of all levels of authority and government to solve this problem, and the cooperation of all levels of business and private sectors. As for the models and tools that can be used, I suppose that the answer to this question greatly depends on what we want to achieve and how many resources we are ready to spend on that, because all the models are different and we can adapt any model. The best model to adapt would be the Western European model, which is based on the individual focus of the OIA, which is based on the private sector influence and supported by the governmental authorities. This model can be adapted in Russia, because in Russia we have a great diversity of different OIAs and they need different regulations, and a Western European model provides for it. And the research that I conducted concerning the Ural OIA shows that this type of region is closer to the catching up region, whereas in the central regions of Russia, for example, Yaroslav region, is mostly closer to classical old IA. So we require a diversified approach, which is closer to the Western European approach. As for future research, in my opinion, within the framework of this research, we were able to focus on general ideas and to form a vector, since there are many possible ways to further detailization of the research. Firstly, that's Russian-oriented approach, post-Soviet analysis, maybe. The second issue is the identification of the catch-up OAAs of world economy as a means to create a forecasting method. Thus, we can forecast in which regions and countries of the world it will be possible to see OAA's emergence and to forecast possible solutions. And the third area would be to estimate the efficiency of the state policy. Currently, the materials that we possess right now do not allow us to conduct this research, but it would be interesting to evaluate the effectiveness of policies of different countries. This would be the third area of research. I suppose that some other areas of research might be also identified, but 3 will be enough, I suppose. If there are any more questions, you may proceed. My question is in line with the previous one. I wanted to ask you, firstly, you have identified 5 models, and you do not identify the Russian model separately. It doesn't mean that the Russian model does not have any individual traits, and it is more likely to have the specific traits of one of the 5 models that you have identified. And you also mentioned that it seems that the Western European model is closer to the Russian model, but which model is currently being implemented on our territory? As for the Russian model, within the framework of my research, I didn't diversify the Russian model. And I would like to say that I did not cover all the models that exist in the modern economics, world economics. There are several additional models which can be researched. I did not identify the Russian model as specific one, because maybe we could talk about the Soviet model rather, because many aspects coincide. The post-Soviet model would include the development of OAAs, the rural region, and certain central regions of the region, Donbass and Kazakhstan regions, and the carried out policy might be similar. And as for the second question, which policy is being implemented right now? Well, I can't say that we do not have a specific policy, but I would like to say that it is unlike any other models which I touched upon in my research. This is why Russian model is not specified in my research. There is a specific policy, but it does not have a uniform model. In different region, it is different. The regions have different approach to revitalization process. Even certain industry and companies carry it out indifferently. So federal and local level measures lack uniformity. But this issue is for further research. We did not focus on the particular aspect, we just had the information in general. You have mentioned in your presentation that the issue of revitalization depends on the outcome. And the issue, what do we want to get as an outcome? What is the optimum of the costs and the results? How do you see the optimum result of revitalization? Can it be appraised and described in a way? Thank you very much for the question. I would like to say that there is no uniform idea, neither in the economic scientists. The researchers do not say that there is one scenario. Usually there is an individual scenario for each region, depending what we want to achieve. I, as the representative of the Ural OIA, I would like to say that industry should serve a locomotive of the region. It is an ideal situation, but the foreign practice does not always support this idea. Many regions restructure the economics based on the service industry. Why do I say that it's better to preserve industry? If the industry was preserved, the region could not preserve it in the original way. The industrialization should be innovated and reformed. There should be a great leap or a move towards the increase of value added cost. There might be innovation, which happened in Aurora, Pittsburgh, or it must be reorientation of the industry, like it was done in the Czech Republic, the production of electronics instead of ferrous metallurgy. And the second reason why I think that it should be better to preserve the industry, the condition of development of OOA in the area of pandemics. The pandemics became a great stress factors for the strategy of the development of the region. And according to the data collected, the regions which paid more attention to the industry of service faced more economic challenges, even the regions which were rather successful in the past. Manchester, which was rather successful previously to the pandemics, due to the decrease in the number of tourists, Manchester became one of the leaders of unemployment since it focused its attention on tourism. But the regions which preserved industrialization, Ruhr, for example, show a relatively low increase of unemployment. And in Poland, where the industrial region was preserved, also the unemployment rate did not accelerate very fast. Do the members of the Decision Council in remote access mode have any questions? I have a question. My question is the following. Are there any criteria which regions can be considered OIA regions and which cannot be considered OIA regions? Any objective criteria? Thank you very much for your question. The specific criteria were summarized in the theoretical part of my dissertation, and they can be seen in a separate table. There is no uniform approach considering these criteria, and partly it is because of the heterogeneity that I pointed out in my presentation. There is a link between the decrease and the lack of reforms. So there is a difference of theoretical approach. As for the regions, they're identified as old industrial areas. I did not conduct the test based on their compliance with the criteria. If the Asian authors consider such regions OIA regions, I took it for granted. So I did not double check these criteria because there are certain discrepancies. If there are no more questions, we will proceed with the external reviews. 4 reviews were received from Lilia Sergeyevna Rivenko, the Doctor of Economic Sciences and the Professor of the Institute of International Relationship of Levinson, Ilina Vitalyevna Andronova, the Doctor of Economic Sciences, Professor and the Head of the Department of the Russian University of the Friendship of People, Yelena Sapir, the Professor of the Department of World Economics of Yaroslav University, and Sergei Anatolievich Dunaev, a PhD of Economic Sciences, Associate Professor of Moscow State University. All their reviews are positive. All their reviews have a high appraisal of the thesis. The colleagues point out the novelty of the thesis, the validity of the results achieved, and the approbation of the results on multiple conferences. Nevertheless, there are certain remarks and suggestions. The remarks from Inna Vitalyevna Andronova are the following. The author states that the issue on the reasons of creation of OIAs in economic sciences is still open. Did the identification of OIAs of catching up type determine the new paradigm, and answer this question. The second question is the following. Were any measures on revitalization of OIA's region on supranational levels adopted? For example, on the line of European Council, in case of Western European and Central European models. I will proceed with other questions because they're very close in their essence. The questions by Lilia Rivenko. Within the framework of the thesis, the author notes the influence of the technological approach based on the idea of the technological differences. But the periodization of the technology is formed on the leader country where the technology improvement took place. But the above-mentioned countries could see the increase and the decrease of OIAs and regions. Is there a dependence between the growth and the decrease on the emergence of technological pattern and emergence of a different pattern? The author notes the contradictive measures of the state support of OAAs of US regions and consider it the main feature of the American model of revitalization of OAAs. Can this heterogeneity be based on the Trump factor, which is not of system approach? Third, the research shows that classical OAAs are mostly characterizing the developing countries, whereas the catch-up OAAs is mostly the phenomenon of developing countries. Does the author consider that the reverse situation is possible, and can both types be present in the foreign practice? And the next question by Dunaev. In the Russian research on this topic, there is the idea that post-revitalization of OAA regions should preserve its industrial focus based on the historical industrial foundation, which seems logical under the situation of neo-industrialization. Is it supported by foreign practice? And within the framework of the work, the author considers 5 models of the state participation in the revitalization of OAAs: Western European, Central European, American, Asian, and Latin American. Which other models could be of scientific interest or might be formed in the nearby future? So the floor is yours, and you might answer these questions. Well, I'll try to provide the answers based on the way they were voiced. I emphasized in the thesis that each researcher and each region, if we talk about the reasons of the economic decline, has a very personalized approach. Very important aspect is that we can say that the hypothesis that the decrease of the OIAs is based not only of internal factors but also of external factors, and the emergence of catching up regions serves as the explanation of that. These regions formed during different economic and social conditions and were based on different areas and the industrialization, and can be seen in the period of decline, which might show the importance of external factors. The second question was linked to the supranational level of industrialization of OAAs. Measures on this level were taken within the framework of the European Union, and European integration had a great influence of the economy of OAAs. Starting from 1988, the regions which suffered from economic decline and which had to restructuralize their system, those are OAAs, and the European Union acts as outside investor through the European Fund of Regional Policies, financing the project of moving towards the green technology and environmentally friendly technology, structural implementation of structural programs. So different measures were taken. Poland and the Czech Republic, which continue the process of the reformation of their OAAs, are the recipients of the funds from this foundation. And for example, we can take the building of the symphonic orchestra, and this building received the subsidies from the joint European funds. The second question was from Lilia Sergeyevna Rivenko about the link between the OIA and the difference of regional approach and global trends. I suppose that there is a close relationship between the emergence of the regions and the technological shifts within the framework of the country. But this requires a specific research. Next, as for the Trump factor, I would like to say that this is mostly a political issue, and I can't talk about whether this factor was random or not random. It influenced the American policy in terms of OIAs, not only his policy on mitigation of environmental standards, which was in contrast to Obama policy, but it formed the long-term policy of American countries, but in terms of a dialogue between the companies and the president's administration about the decrease of the certain standards. And then it was noted that OOAs is classical OOAs is mostly common for developed countries, where catch-up OOAs for developing countries. Yes, it is the general trend, but international practice might see the regions which are in contrast to this trend. As I have already mentioned, this is the Ural region. Among other examples are the Taegu region in the Korean Republic, which in 50s was formed as important textile region, which depended on the production of cotton and silk. So it was characterized as a catch-up industry. But in 60s, the region used nylon production, automatized the process, and became the classic OIA due to the use of technology. The reverse example is the Chilean region, which in the 19th century emerged as an important world center and which corresponded to the classical OIAs. But in the 20th century, because of the state support, there was copper mining industry emerging, and thus the region became a catch-up region. And the final questions from Dunaev Sergei Anatolyevich. I have partially answered this question, since that the region should focus on its practice. And as for other models, well, I have voiced this idea. Apart from the post-Soviet model, which exists in my idea, the economic scientist has the idea of Turkish paradigm, which might be of practical interest. And the German professor talks about such cities as Bangladesh and Vietnam, and which might in future see their personalized approach in these countries. Thank you very much. Irina Vladimirovna Sapir has no remarks in her review, so we'll move according to our procedure to the reviews by the members of the Dissertation Council. And I would like Arina Eduardovna to answer the reviews in order they are presented. Since all the reviews were published on the website of Specility State University, I would ask to the members of the Station Council to voice on the main features. If there are no objections, we will proceed. Are there any objections? No, there are no objections. Thank you very much. Then we move on. Natalia Anatolievna Navrotska, the floor is yours. You might remain seated. The novelty of the relevance of the research is out of question, since different principles are important in changing the world economy in connection to technological orders, and different regions move into the traditional industrial regions and old industrial areas. And according to the presentation that we saw today, this is not characteristic of the 20th century. We might remember the 18th and 19th century, and we must understand that these trends will continue. And the topic of this research is interesting both from the point of view of the analysis of the modern state and the economic state of Russia, and the perspectives of the development from the point of view which regions might become the old industrial areas. As for the degree of validity of the scientific provisions, the validity of the scientific results are provided by the correct goal setting, correct choice and application of key method of research, including the methods of analytical generalization, graphical interpretation of data, deduction and induction, model and abstraction, use of domestic and foreign scientific research, and practice of international development or regulation of IAs, use of extensive statistical and factual material. The novelty of the development is in the development of comprehensive scientific concept of state regulation of revitalization of IA, and the main results represent theoretical propositions formulated by the author, or the practical recommendations, or a new interpretation of a number of provisions in the development of previously covered ideas in the Russian sciences. The expertise of the thesis shows the scientific, theoretical, and methodological independence of the author, and the contribution to the development of theory and practice of revitalization of IA. And the most important results obtained are the following. The author proved the heterogeneity of OAA as economic category and developed the topology, providing the diversification between the classical and catch-up type. The author also considered the concept of OAAs, of the catching up type, as a separate notion, providing 5 models of revitalization. The author highlighted the classification features of every model. The structure of the thesis is comprehensive and systematized. The work includes 3 chapters, sections, introductions, and conclusion. 8 chapters of the thesis contain detailed research-based economic theory. Nevertheless, there are certain shortcomings. The concept proposed by the author of the overtaken OIA of the Asia region, pages 46-48, can be noted. The author emphasizes that governmental support allowed individual regions to have the leading position in the world on production of certain types. But at the same time, the work does not give the comprehensive overview of the role of the state for the future development of the region, including the reasons for the subsequent stagnation. Was it caused by the decrease of the government support, or the government support formed non-competitive conditions which resulted in stagnation? The second idea, one of the reasons for the decline of the first type of OAA is the transfer of production to countries of Asia. Since the peak of the development of such OAA, according to the author, is in 1950s and 60s. In this period, Asian countries were not yet active or world economic processes, and the main flows of investment that accounted for this period to developing countries were sent to the countries of Latin America. On page 114, the author addresses this issue. Probably, such transfer of production should have been started well before the peak point of development of OAA to cause further recession. Also, the alternative reasons for the decline of OAA associated with economic recovery after the Second World War, transformation industry of developed countries after the military emergence of a military focus, as well as slow-down economic growth due to the completion of economic recovery in post-war period. The third, the approach presented by the author made it possible to systematize the models and the rotation of the OAA based on geographic position. Moreover, within the framework of the most model, the regions the countries had specialization in raw materials were considered, and regions with industrial specialization. It appears interesting to compare the state policy of revitalization of regions of different models, take into account the specified industry focusing or expansion of the author's approach by including the factor of specific industry specialization. In this regard, the basic scenario proposed by the author on pages 127-28 could include industry specialization as well as comparative analysis of public policy for various models of OAA, depending on the industry specialization. And the fourth, the thesis presents a fairly detailed analysis of the state policy and tools for reviving the regions of the countries Europe and United States. At the same time, there is a different approach during conclusions to the paragraphs and regions. The conclusions give the principle of the policy of restructuring of OAA in countries of Western Europe. And in points 2.2 are given the main mechanism and tools of restructuring. Then in point 2.3 contains assessment of the outcomes of the restructuring. These sections would look more logical if there was a unified approach to the logic of the presentation of the material and drawing up conclusions. The general conclusion on the compliance of this station with the requirements. The above-mentioned comments do not diminish the positive assessment of the dissertation result of the whole. The dissertation research of Mordvinova, Arina, and Eduardovna on the topic State Policy of Old Industrial Areas of Revitalization in Practice of Foreign Countries is scientific and qualification work on the basis of the research to develop theoretical provision and methodological approaches, and the publication reflecting the main content of the dissertation of the thesis, as well as scientific provision. The dissertation meets the basic requirements established by the order dated 0109-2016 on the procedure for awarding academic degrees of St. Petersburg State University. Applicant Mordvinova, Arina, and Eduardovna desires the award of the degree of candidate economic sciences in the major 08-0014 World Economics. Clause 9 and 11 of the said order is not violated. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I didn't turn on the microphone. Thank you very much, Natalia Anatolievna. Arina Eduardovna, the floor is yours. Natalia Anatolievna, thank you very much for your remarks and for your comments. I'll try to be very concise. The first two aspects concern the reasons for deinternationalization of OAA, and I partly talked about these ideas, and the research conducted did not allow us to say whether the state played any role in the stagnation of the catching up type of OAA. Certain authors of the Asian region say that the lack of support in China and the launch of the Chinese initiative resulted in the acute stage of the crisis. But the research did not allow us to support or to nullify the importance of this aspect. But endogenous and exogenous determinants of the deindustrialization touched upon these ideas, but only in general. But as for investment into the OIAs as one of the causes for decrease of the classical OIAs, on page 49 of the thesis, we say that the decrease of OIA was due to the relocation of traditional industries into the Asian countries. In here we talk not about the foreign investment, but the industrialization of Asian OIAs, which is viewed in detail in points 2.3 and 2.2, which has the shift, which talks about the shift. Industrialization of catching up OIA started 15 or 20 years before the decrease of the classical OIAs. It might be viewed as one of the causes of the decrease in classical OIAs. Another issue was related to the state policies about OIAs with different specializations. Thank you very much for identifying this aspect and focus on it in my future research. Now I would like to say that there was a different approach to industrial-oriented countries and raw material-oriented countries. Certain OIAs had double majoring. For example, they were focusing on coal mining and ferrous metallurgy. And it will be interesting to further research this aspect. As for design of the thesis, well, I thank you for your remarks, and I'll try to note that in the future. Thank you very much. And we give the floor to Elena Mikhailovna Korostashevskaya. I'd like to say that the work is relevant and there is no need to argument that, and all the positions for defense are validated. As for the novelty, the approach of the author can be clearly seen in practical and theoretical aspects. It is worth noting to pay attention to the influence of the author into typologization of the OIAs and into classical and catch-up. The author extended the nomenclature by introducing the notion OIAs of catch-up type and its definition based on the way the regions of this type were developing. And it seems expedient to have introduced this concept in the context of the referring of the global trend linked to the emergence in Asians and Latin America regions of OIAs, which have their specific traits. The author systematized the general experience of the development of OIAs, thus determining 5 types, provided detailed analysis based on specific cases, and the author thus determined the weak and strong points of the existent approaches to the state regulation of the process of revitalization of OIAs. The practical interest is in the fact that the algorithm proposed, considering the formation of the state policy in terms of OIAs, might be of practical importance. The experience of the transfer of experience might be of extreme importance. There are certain aspects for discussion. Firstly, we talk about the usage of the Western European region experience on the experience of other countries as a whole, and then it violates the principle of individual approach to the solution of the problem. On page 82, the author notes that likewise, like in Germany, UK, Spain, and Central Europe, other regions pay attention to the development of cultural objects and development of industrialization of tourism. Also, the paragraphs 1.1 and 1.2 are not entirely consistent. The first paragraph talks about the location of industrialization, and the second paragraph talks about the regions. The third issue is manufacturing universities. Paragraph 2.3, dealing with the politics of revitalization of OOAs of the US, we know that there are such terms as research universities and entrepreneurial universities. Nevertheless, the above-mentioned remarks do not undervalue the result of the research. The thesis can be considered a complete research work compliant with the above said goal. This is an interesting research, and the dissertation of Mordvinova Arina Eduardovna on the topic State Policy of OIA Revitalization in the Practice of Foreign Countries corresponds to the main requirements of the Order 0109-2016-6821/1, and the applicant Mordvinova Arina Eduardovna can be awarded the scientific degree of Candidate of Economic Sciences on Major 080014 World Economy. Thank you. Thank you very much for your review. Arina Eduardovna, you have the floor. Elena Mikhailovna, thank you very much. As for the first point, I would like to say that within the framework of the European model, we focused on the individualized model. But each region, there was a detailed individualized scenario of post-crisis development. But the tools and measures used were not unique. They were often used in different regions and countries, and even different models. For example, the program of the development of industrial tourism was one of the measures in RUR, and then this measure was used in Poland and Czech Republic in the reconstruction of industrial areas into tourist areas. Another example is the creation of objects of cultural value in Manchester and Bilbao within the framework of Western European model. These regions paid attention to the creation of museums and theatres. Manchester paid attention to the creative industry, and Bilbao to the development of tourism. Another aspect was related to the clarification of the idea of consistency of paragraphs 1.2 and 1.2. In paragraph 1.2, based on the spatial theory, I identify the factors which influenced the formation of the centers of world economy and the risks faced during the evolution, thus laying ground for a theoretical approach to old industrial aspects of this region. The second idea was the clarification of the term was of manufacturing university. This term is based on the manufacturing university as of 2015, and according to this act, there was an annual allocation of $5 million, from $5 to $25 million to universities for joint products with manufacturing enterprises. And this category of universities does not belong to the established division of the US university, although it can be found in the original literature. Thank you very much. Leonid Borisovich, are you ready to voice your review? Dear colleagues, the work is highly interesting, and I faced the notion OIAs long ago, at the very dawn of my scientific career. And because I lived in the industrial areas of Moscow, and when with my students we visited such centers of the Soviet Union, we could see that such industrialization leads to social pathologies, to the lagging behind of social sphere, lack of development of social sphere. And I understand what our applicant talked about. The countries which played an important role on the formation of world economy and political prestige later on face these problems. And I agree with the speakers who talked before me. Unfortunately, we cannot hear the speaker. We need to announce the technical break number 2. We can't hear you, Leonid Borisovich. Leonid Borisovich, can you hear me? Could you speak closer to the mic, please? We cannot hear you really well. The technical break is over. You can proceed. If we talk about the appraisal of work of the applicant, I think that this work can serve the basis for future research on the topic dedicated to the emergence, decrease and restoration of OAAs and their adapting to the changing environment in the world economy. And the historic analysis, the use of the concept of life cycle and technological orders, comprehensive analysis of the international experience of the state support of OAAs, created methodological basis for the research of this territory, allowed to better understand their place in the industrial systems and the perspectives of their competition with the newly emerging industrial areas. The thesis showed the concept of inheterogeneity, and a very important conclusion is that inevitability of reproduction of OAAs together with the development of new regions with the new service and industries. We will always have these OIAs, and we will constantly have to think how we need to modernize them, how to manage them, and this will be an eternal problem for regional economic science. And a very important conclusion is that there is no universal approach. We need individualized approach, and there is no one recipe. Details need to be considered for each specific case, and a specific approach should be found. A very important issue is that authorities in business have the dilemma. Should they focus on the development of new branches of industries in new regions or abroad, or taking into account social and economic importance to conduct balanced policy of development of new industrial regions and revitalization of OIAs? And I think the applicant supports the second option. There should be a balanced approach. New territories should be developed. At the same time, the old ones should be preserved, and their function should be re-evaluated. And now I'd like to move on to certain discursive issues. What is the positive aspect of the thesis? Each thesis generates certain questions. And maybe you ask this question not so much to the applicant, but as to yourself. And one of the issues and the question is the following: the emergence of the difference of old industrial area as a reality and as a scientific notion. Do they exist in reality after the revitalization of Europe and the US? Or are these the region of new industrialization? Or can they be considered as a criteria of oldness of the industrial regions and the decrease of its stake in the value added cost and the loss of the position on internal and foreign markets? Or can rural now be considered an OIA since it lost the features of OIA and became the innovative region of Germany? Second question: to what extent did OIA of catch-up type stimulate the move of developing countries towards the level of the developed countries? In my perception, in the Republic of China, the special economic zones where high-tech industries concentrated and were located by international companies, whereas the northern eastern part of the country became the obstacle for development of the countries. And thirdly, the role of European integration for the revitalization of OIAs. Energy, ecological and industrial and taxation policy, together with national regional policy, triggered the industrialization and restructuralization of the economies of OIA of the above-mentioned states. What measures and tools of state support might be used to stimulate the economic growth in Russia of OIAs? On the whole, we would like to say that the applicant provided a fully fledged, independent and comprehensive thesis on compliant with all the requirements. I'm not going to give the figures and slashes, and the applicant, Mordvinova Arina Eduardovna, deserves to be awarded the scientific degree of the candidate of economic scientist major 08/0014 World Economics. And point paragraphs 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned procedure have not been violated, which is of special importance. Thank you. Lady Borisovich, thank you very much for your question and for your comments. Irina Eduardovna, now you have the floor. In response to your question about the OIA after revitalization policy in certain countries, I'd like to say that there is a significant number of criteria that might be used to identify whether the region is OIA or not. And the status is not based on the decrease of the role in the national economics. Some of them also include ecological programs, social challenges, domineering of certain industries. And the policy of revitalization promotes the changes of the characteristics of the region and manages to change the status of the region. But when this change takes place is a difficult issue. During the process of revitalization of OAAs, they still preserve the features characteristic of OAAs. Even Ruhr in Germany, which you specially mentioned, became highly innovative and only recently stopped being the object of a specific state policy. And before that, the state spent from 50 to 100 billion euros on support of the production. In my perception, the objective approach of the OEAs, which are at the final stage of the transformation, is offered by European researchers. European Parliament talk about old industrialized area instead of all industrial ones. And this approach allows us to emphasize the industrial past of the region and the fact that there are certain problems in the areas, but not focuses on the industrial past of the region. As for the catch-up OAAs of catch-up type, unlike the classic ones, have never been at the center of the economic development of the country because they were based on the technology which in the developed countries were either at the maturity period or stagnation period. In China, the locomotive of the growth were in other regions of the country. But the supplementary programs paid special attention to the idea of substituting the policy. São Paulo started developing after 122 local automobile production industry, created the association and talked the government into providing protectionist measures for domestic production. As for European Union, well, I have already voiced my idea, and I'm not going to repeat this. As for adapting the foreign experience, I have also mentioned my idea considering this issue today. Thank you, Arina Eduardovna. Tadeusz Trojkevich, now we give the floor to you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Уважаемые дамы и господа, ladies and gentlemen, let me say a few words of introduction at the very beginning. It is a great honor for me to be a member of the Dissertation Council at St. Petersburg State University, with which so many world-renowned scientists have been connected, including also Nobel Prize winners in economic sciences. But I also would like to emphasize that a lot of researchers and students of Polish origin were connected with this university, including one of my professors at Adam Mickiewicz University, Professor Viktor Borejko, who was my teacher in economic geography, and he graduated from your university. In front of me on my wall, I can see diploma of honorary foreign member of ARGO. ARGO is Asocjacja Rosyjskich Geografów Обществоведов. This diploma is signed by Professor Chistobayev from St. Petersburg State University. So as you can see, I have had already some connections with your university. But I must admit that although I was a chairman or member of more than 50 postdoctoral dissertation councils in my country, but in Russia, I take part in the works of such a council for the first time. So I am not fully familiar with your procedures of promotions for academic degrees, but I hope that my opinion will meet your requirements. So now I would like to relate to the relevance of the topic of dissertation research. And of course, I would like to focus only on those items which were not discussed earlier. In my opinion, the dissertation falls on the one hand within the scope of world economics, but on the other hand, it also contains many elements of economic geography. So, in my opinion, it is a good example of this so-called evolutionary approach developed in both mentioned scientific disciplines. Therefore, this dissertation fits well with the implementation of two contemporary research trends, such as interdisciplinarity and the above-mentioned evolutionary approach. The next remark. In my opinion, Arina Mordvinova continues good traditions of the Ural Economic School, related, among other things, to studies on the nature of old industrial areas in the context of economic geography. So this is simply my point of view as an economic geographer. The dissertation topic has been chosen very well. I think that in view of a rapid increase in the number of studies on
We have no sound, unfortunately. We declare the technical break number 3. There is no sound.
And what now?
Okay.
Is it better?
Yes. Технический перерыв номер.
So the technical break number 3 is over.
Is it better? Can you hear me? Yeah. So the topic has been chosen very well, and in my opinion, and the applicant has made an interesting attempt to analyze old industrial areas as part of global economic trends. And this is another strength of this dissertation, in my opinion. Such a very vast geographical scope of the research, the comparative studies conducted in the dissertation, and the formulation of an algorithm of the state strategy development for OIA's economic recovery, give, in my opinion, the reviewed work the value of universality and concurrently of practical usefulness. As far as validity of scientific results is concerned, I think that this validity follows from several reasons. The first is the formulation of very ambitious, although not easy, objectives. The structure of the thesis is logical. The dissertation rests on thorough literature studies also. All conclusions are embedded in theory and well documented, and the knowledge of peculiarities related to state intervention in some old industrial areas is, in my opinion, quite impressive. This is noticeable inter alia on the example of the Upper Silesia industrial district or industrial region in Poland, which I investigated myself for some time. Therefore, I may confirm both that the relevant choice of source materials and their correct interpretation by the author of the dissertation. I don't want to list all points, all important points of the novelty of the dissertation provisions. I've listed a lot of them in my review, in theoretical dimension, in empirical dimension, and also in practical dimension. Overall, the dissertation research makes, in my opinion, a significant contribution to our knowledge about state policies for old industrial areas based on international experience. This is, in my opinion, very important. So now I would like to focus on some specific areas for discussion. My first remark is that the candidate did not pay enough attention to one of the key notions of the thesis, that is that of revitalization. The semantic scope of this notion often embraces not only economic recovery, but also revitalization of the built environment. So this was my suggestion that probably in the title of the dissertation, economy revitalization should be included. So the word of economy revitalization. My second remark is connected with the fact that the applicant has paid relatively little attention to such issues as failures of some revitalization policies, their social costs, limitations of the proposed models, as well as barriers to their implementation. This is not a critique, but rather an invitation to explore these issues in the further research, because I understand that the scope of each dissertation requires limits. My next comment or doubt is connected with the question if all the theories, especially of Thorsten Hegerstrand, presented in Table 2, can be included within the stage New Economic Geography. I also wonder why in the brief description of the technological paradigms and their periodization in Table 9, there is no mention of the output of Nikolai Kondratiev. I refer to it deliberately because this dissertation defense is held at the St. Petersburg State University. As far as I know, Kondratiev was studying here and had strong ties with this university. So, in my opinion, the applicant should be proud of such a famous Russian scientific predecessor and promote him in particular. Of course, this is only my subjective view, and the omission of Kondratiev does not affect the quality of the research results. In general, I conclude that the dissertation meets the basic requirements established by order number 6821/1 on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. Arina Mordvinova deserves the award of the scientific degree candidate in economics in the specialty 080014 World Economics. Clause 11 of the order by the author of the thesis is not broken. Of course, I have not prepared any special questions to the applicant. But what I am dealing right now is the topic of creative and cultural industries. So if I can ask you, what is your opinion about the role, the importance of creative and cultural industries in the policies of revitalization of old industrial areas? In general, I assess this dissertation very high. Thank you very much. Большое спасибо.
Tadeusz, thank you very much for your extensive review, comments, remarks, and question. Thank you. Arina,
Arina, the floor is yours. You might answer the questions and the remarks. Well, I will answer in order of the questions they appeared. The term revitalization should have been paid more attention in the research paper, and it's linked to the synonyms. But in my opinion, the name economic revitalization would not be expedient as a part of the name of the thesis, because in many cases the instruments of a built environment, environmental policies and economic policies were important tools of revitalization of OAs. For example, the city program adopted by the British government of 70s, which provided for the investment of about 100 million pounds on rebuilding of the squares in Manchester and Liverpool. And the program of International Park Building Exhibition also provided for the competition of the projects to create new areas. In Bilbao, new industrial areas were created to improve the image of the region. As for the second object, these aspects are of special importance, and they are necessary to be considered since catch-up regions face the revitalization process. These models are being formed because they evaluate the effectiveness of the policy. The city agglomeration of Detroit, where the municipalities and the business, the private sector, could not form the uniform strategy, which led to the bankruptcy. And during the pandemic, many of the problems were exacerbated. The level of unemployment was 48 prior to pandemics. And by the end of the pandemic regions, the number of jobs decreased by more than 100,000. As for the theories in Table 2 to economic geography, when determining the stages, I worked on the research by the Niminov on the work published in the Economy of the Ural Region in 2014. Professor Nimitsa talks about this region as the region of the new economic geography region, and that's why I used this term in my work. As for your just comment about the lack of mentioning of Kondratiev in my work. Within the framework of my research, I compared the stages of development of OIAs with the periodical technological orders according to Glaser theory, because most of the Russian researchers use this theory. But the comparison of OIA with the theory of the theory of Kondratiev is of special importance as well, especially with the emergence of ketchup OAAs. It is worth noting that the decrease of classical OAAs and the emergence of this phenomenon of OAAs is linked to the fourth wave of Kondratiev. And the ketchup OAA's emergence is at the final stage of the fifth wave. And this issue is to be evaluated separately, and maybe it will provide a new point of view on the emergence of ketchup OAAs in the world economy. As for misspelling of a certain surname, I would like to say that I double-checked this issue, and this misspells names were found in the English version of the thesis, but in the list of literature they are spelled correctly. And as for creative industries and cultural aspect of the revitalization of OAAs, that was a very popular scenario. I cannot appraise its efficiency, how much it influenced, but many countries of the Western Europe used this scenario very often in the form of domineering aspect of revitalization of OAAs. If in Poland and the Czech Republic this was an additional tool to the development of tourism, it was an added tool to the general policies. And in Western Europe countries, this was the dominating approach. But it creates social challenges, and whether this strategy will be sustainable, we are not sure. Under the current social economic situation, when the tourism is limited, the regions face a new stage of the crisis. According to the information of 2020, the regions which were focusing on this approach face significant economic decrease. Arina, thank you very much. According to the procedure, we move on to the review by the chairperson of the council, and I would like to express my idea. In my opinion, the thesis is highly influential. The author is a mature scientist who not only evaluates the works of predecessor researchers, but talks about the expediency of certain measures taken by the state. The relevance of the topic was previously discursive, but nowadays, within the recent 5 years, there were many fresh publications concerning this issue. And we can see not only the revitalization of industrial areas, but also the revitalization of economic ideas, which see the mechanisms of the development of the regions, the respective regions. In my idea, the pandemics caused additional interest from behalf of business and authorities concerning the opportunity to develop the regions. As justly stated by the applicant, these regions are an integral part of the global production systems. And when these systems face challenges and the links sometimes are disintegrated, the issue on the position of certain industrial units is of special importance on all levels, both on academic level, on business level, governmental level. or even on on the level of international community. The thesis has a lot of elements of scientific novelty. I'd like to ponder upon several. The author conducted comprehensive work on studying different theories and approaches to the research of these areas, and the periodization and summary provided by the applicant is the scientific novelty which might be used in future research and might be used by the representatives of authorities. OIAs are considered as separate economic category, and Arina Eduardovna shows heterogeneity of it and multi-layer approach, which plays a special role in the development of modern science. And the basic algorithm of the development of state strategy that can be seen in the thesis, the algorithm of revitalization of the economics of industrial areas, is described in great detail and might be considered not only as a result of scientific work, but also as a practical tool that might be used by the representatives of organizations and institutions who are interested in considering these regions and deciding on their future development. Nevertheless, all types of research might have certain shortcomings. Well, firstly, the methodology and the design of the research could have been more well thought. The dissertation almost lacks entirely the author's calculations and the double check of the hypothesis, which could have intensified the research aspect. The second and third chapters see a number of terms and notions describing the foreign experience of revitalization of OAAs. That's old European model of state regulation, state participation in revitalization of OAAs, American state policy, Asian state model, Latin American model. Does it mean that the use of so many terms, that there is the lack of state regulation in the countries of Central Europe or the United States of America? And what does the author understand under the notion model of state policy? What traits and characteristics does the model have? Third, isolated reviewing of OIAs does not allow the applicant to make a link between the development of challenged regions and the policy conducted by the states or international regions to support the industries. The research does not look at the modern industrial policy of the European Union oriented on the shift of industrial production in the EU countries, which results in the increase in job numbers, increase in value-added cost, and so on. These measures form part of the strategy of revitalization of OIAs. Fourth, from the practical point of view, it would be interesting to compare the quantitative indexes of the state support of OAAs of classical and catch-up types. In particular, the author compares the costs on reconstruction of depressive territories of Manchester, which have multiple times mentioned, in 70s in pounds, and in Ruhr in euro. How can it be compared? That's an interesting issue. The fifth remark to the applicant. The applicant has a very easy approach to geographical terms. Western Europe and European Union are often mentioned as countries and not region, and so on and so forth. And I would like to recommend to include in the future research the idea of researching the idea of the traps, especially in the Asian regions, the traps which have been recently diagnosed. Thank you for your attention. Most importantly, the research corresponds to the level of the requirements by order of the 1st of September 2016, 6821/1 on awarding scientific degrees at St. Petersburg State University. The applicant, Arina Eduardovna Mordvinova, deserves to be awarded the scientific degree of candidate of World Economics Specialization 080024. Thank you for your attention. Arina Eduardovna, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for your remarks. I'd like to pay attention to certain aspects that you have pointed out. Firstly, I would like to emphasize the fact that the synonyms used in the paragraphs are used only for a stylistical purpose, and they do not show different aspects. Under the model of state policy, we understand the scheme of action of the authorities to solve the problems of OAAs. The characteristics of the model are the elements of the model, and the elements are the subjects, different levels of authorities in business, sometimes universities and scientific institutions, research institutions form part of it. The object is OAA, and in a more narrow approach, specific industries or even companies. And the third element are the tools used to implement certain policies. As for supranational level, I have already answered this question, and I will not repeat that. And I fully agree with your remarks, considering the quantitative approach, quantitative estimations. I've already mentioned that this is due to the lack of data, considering the catch-up OAAs. Many countries do not have the comprehensive data where these types of arrays emerged, and much of the research was done based on the data obtained in 2015 and 2016. A relatively short period elapsed since their decrease, and revitalization has just started. That's why we cannot comprehensively estimate the efficiency. I also view this as a possibility of future research within the framework of the possible diversification into raw material and industrial aspect. As for the middle income trap as the possible cause of the decrease of the catch-up OAA, it might serve as one of the causes, but the estimation of the causes was not part of the research. But I do agree with your remark, and This might give us a new insight into the causes of emergence of OLA, and many aspects will need to be viewed in more details. And as for the methodology and the design of the research inaccuracies with geographic terms, I would like to apologize for the inaccuracies and improve in the future work. Thank you very much for the answers to the questions and the comments. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, is everybody satisfied with the received responses?
Все, да, но я так смотрю, что да, члены диссертационного совета, которые с нами работают в удаленном режиме.
I can see that the members of the Dissertation Council do not have any questions. Then we move on to the next stage of our order. Well, due to pandemics, we do not have any listeners in the hall present, but I would like to ask if there are any questions received via email. No, there were no questions received via the website or email. Thus, we move on to the next stage of the procedure. That is the remarks of the scientific advisor, Andrei Alexandrov. We give the floor to you. The floor is yours. Good afternoon once again. I'd like to say that I'm highly worried, although this is not my first applicant. I'd like to note three aspects. I'd like to say that I am very thankful to St. Petersburg State University for the opportunity to present such complex research work for review by the I'm thankful to the authorities which talked about the use of their work. And I would also thank Natalia Stepanova, who provided support to the applicant, and all those authorities who participated in the carrying out this defense today. I would also want to thank the members of the Dissertation Council, Leonid Borisovich, Elena Glebovna, and Professor Tadeusz Strejkevich for participation in today's meeting. I consider that the St. Petersburg State University has done great work in using the foreign specialists in the Dissertation Council, and the presence of our colleague from Poland improves the verification of the competence and professional level of the Dissertation Council. Last but not least, I would like to say that knowing the applicant from the times of being a student, diligence, responsibility of the applicant, and I'd like to say that the great ideas that were voiced during today's presentation are very important. And I'd like to thank Professor Strejkevich about further integration of concepts by Kondratiev, and the creative industries mentioned should also form part of the future research, because we've seen a number of research ideas on the practical levels. And we might see the expansion of Ural-Polish cooperation in the area, resulting from today's defense. And the traps of middle income are of special importance, and I'm very thankful for all this discussion and for the defense. Andrei Alexandrovich, thank you very much. I would like to thank you for your kind words. Dear colleagues, does anybody have the desire to speak? So do the members present or members online want to ask questions? Natalia Alexandrovna, are there any questions? There are none. Then we will move on from the discussion and answer to the question to the procedural. Do the members of the Dissertation Council have remarks or questions about the procedure of the meeting, including those related to the remote access mode? Dear participants of the Dissertation Council in the remote access mode, do you have any questions or remarks? No remarks. Everything's fine. Then we move on to the next point, which is voting. The time is 5:04 Moscow time, p.m. Dear colleagues, we have the opportunity, before we move into voting, to announce the break to discuss the result of the defense. With the broadcast sound muted, how do you think? Do we need such a break to discuss the results of the defense? No. No, there is no need. Tadeusz, no. Do we need to discuss the results of the defense? All right, thank you very much. Then we continue the meeting. Dear colleagues, I would like you to formulate your opinion considering the thesis. First of all, the procedural issues. Can we hear and see each other well? I'm raising the question of awarding Mordvinova Arina Eduardovna the degree of Candidate of Economic Sciences in the scientific major 080014 World Economics for an open roll call. I remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Council on the issue of awarding economic degrees considered positive is more than half, but at least 3 members of the Dissertation Council who participated in the meeting voted for it, in accordance with the clause 23 of the procedure. Thus, we start the voting. Council member Nawrocka Natalia Anatolyevna, your opinion, please. The analysis of the thesis. I'm for awarding the scientific degree. Elena Mikhailovna Specility. I'm for. Bardomsky Leonid Borisovich, your opinion, please. For. Council member Tadeusz Strykevich, your opinion.
Also for.
And I, the chairman of the council, Efimova Elena, my opinion, for. Thus, dear colleagues and guests, I declare that out of 5 members of the council participating in the voting of the Dissertation Council, voted for 5 people. Voted against, no. Abstained, no. The decision to award Mordvinova Arina Eduardovna the academic degree of Candidate of Economic Sciences in the scientific specialty 080014 World Economics accepted. Arina Eduardovna, now the floor is yours for the final word. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the St. Petersburg State University for the provided opportunity. I'd like to sincerely thank all the members of the Dissertation Council. Your comments, remarks and questions allowed me to have a different approach to the topic discussed and will serve as a ground for my future research. I would also like to thank the Department of World Economics of St. Petersburg State University, the head of which is Turin Felix. And I would also like to thank Victoria Alexandrovna Stepanovna for professional work and comprehensive answers to all the questions emerging. I would also like to especially thank Maltsev Andrei Alexandrovich for great support on all the levels of implementing the scientific research. It was a great pleasure to work under your control. Thank you very much. We declare the meeting closed. I would like to thank everyone for participation in the meeting. And I would like to ask you to turn off the broadcast of the meeting. Thank you very much. Goodbye.